Good evening and welcome excuse me, to the October 26th Chatham Select Board. I'm Peter Kokolas, Chair of the Select Board. This meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone else is recording the meeting, please let me know. Pursuant to Governor Baker's June 16, 2021 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, that's General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, until April 1, 2022. This meeting of the Chatham Select Board is being conducted both in person and remotely for public participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410. Conference ID number is 134-208-476#, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. While this is a live broadcast and simulcast on Channel 18, despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. And let me remind everyone to please mute your mics and turn off your cameras unless you're speaking. Let me start with a roll call. First, Board Member Davis.
Present.
Board Member Metters.
Present.
Board Members Nicastro.
Present.
Board Member Dykins.
Present.
And the chair is present. I'd like also to, we're having our budget summit, and the Finance Committee is here, and we have members of the school board also, and the superintendent of schools. If I could, Chairman Daniels, would you roll call the Finance Committee?
I will do that. Good evening, everyone. Barbara Madison. Joanne Sprague.
Here.
Norma Avalar. Florence Selden.
Here.
John Papalardo. John Whalen. Here. Thank you. Tommy Doan. Andy Young. Andy, I know just got back from the doctor's, and I am present.
Thank you, Steve. For the school committee, I see that Jacqueline Zebret Long is here, and that's the only one I see on. Okay. Given that, our business tonight, which will have public comment through the entire agenda, first one is to consider a request for to open the 2021 Bay Scallop season. It's really cool. And then we get into our budget cycle. So let's move right into the approval to open the 2021 Bay Scallop season. Is Renee on? I didn't see her.
She is.
I'm right here.
All right, thank you. Welcome, Renee.
Yes, I'm seeking the Select Board's approval to open Bay Scallop season on Monday, November 1st.
Okay, any questions from the board? Comments? Can we have a motion to approve? So moved. We have a second?
So moved.
Okay. Seeing no other discussion, well, let me start the other end. Mr. Dykins.
Aye.
Mr. Nicastro.
Aye.
Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
And the chair says aye. Thank you. Let's move right into into the budget summit. And let me turn it over to Jill and to Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to just take off my mask for a second. I'm sitting next to Alex Halela, our Finance Director, and we have many department heads in the meeting tonight, but virtually. So Alex is going to share her screen, and then we're going to start with the budget summit. Please note that you can ask questions throughout the presentation. Alex is naturally going to go through the agenda, certain items on the agenda, pause for any questions, and then we can move on, because the goal of tonight is to have an interactive conversation. So as she's working to share her screen.
Thank you, Jill. Just prior to sharing my screen, I want to remind the taxpayers and citizens that tax bills are due on Monday, November 1st by 4 p.m. in the Treasurer's office. There's also a drop box right outside Town Hall, as sometimes mail delivery is very slow, so we want to make sure that you get your taxes in on time. So without further ado, I will share my screen.
So I want to welcome everybody to our 10th annual Budget Summit. It's really a great program and event that we work through to get your input and the public's input on the next fiscal year's budget. And so interestingly, we're planning for fiscal year '23, and that is July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. And tonight's theme is budgeting for a resilient and sustainable future.
Okay, so I think everyone can see this.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Well, as Jill had just mentioned, we're moving away from our COVID budgets, and we're looking to budget for a resilient and sustainable future. So we start first with the state of the town. Oh, okay, that makes it easier to speak. Thank you. So as we've discussed in previous budget summits, we're looking for the outcomes of the budget summit is to have a better understanding of the town's financial position and condition, to identify any emerging problems before they reach a serious proportion, identify existing problems that may require any correction, present a comprehensive picture of our strengths and weaknesses, and instead of focusing on one ratio or one metric, and discuss long-range considerations into the annual budget process. And we have to remember that we are still in a pandemic. While COVID has lessened, we still need to be very cautious of any future possibilities for an increase in the pandemic. So we consider that when we look at the budgets. So first is the state of the town where we are right now. The current fiscal year is fiscal year 2022, which just began this July 1st, 2021, and runs until June 30th of next year. This was the overview of the budget for FY 2022 was a COVID core services budget, which was a pivot from what we had done when we had the COVID-19 pivot budget in FY 2021, which was budgeting in the unknown. And we knew that at the time budgeting in the unknown would probably be a few years out. So we will review the year-to-date review and projections, both our revenues and expenditures for FY 2021 and FY 2022. So again, as we said, FY 2021 was a budgeting in the unknown budget. This slide is from May 2020, May 7th, 2020, when we had reworked the budget for the 3 months from March until May. And we knew that the financial world was uncertain. We planned then for FY 2021, 22, and 23, thinking that we would still have issues related to COVID-19 that we needed to plan for. So the FY 2022 budget core services was priority funding, so we looked to trim expenditures where possible. We focused on initiatives to streamline processes and increase efficiencies, and to preserve and build social infrastructure and resiliency. So again, the core services budget was came for FY 2022 for the operating without the schools, $33,045,296, and that was an increase from the budget that was presented to you at the budget presentation in January, because we had the board had supported some additional firefighters, so they were added to that budget. So we did have a small growth budget, and we had some budget drivers also for FY 2022 from FY 2021 that weren't incorporated in FY 2021. The FY 2022 capital plan was an increase over FY 2021, $2,881,200, funded through available funds, no impact on the tax levy, as I always mention when presenting the capital plan. So the FY 2022 budget versus FY 2021 was a 4.5% increase in the overall revenues. And highlighting that was only a 2.7% increase in the tax levy, but an increase to our local estimated receipts, which reduces the amount that we rely on the tax levy for. State aid came in basically level funded, and then we used an additional 9.5% in other available funds. So again, When we had the COVID-19 budget, we tried to reserve those funds and keep our reserves, while also trying to really reduce the impact on the tax levy. So we cut the budget in FY 2021. FY 2022, you see us using more of those local estimated receipts, so not to rely on the tax levy as much. And then for our expenditures, those also went up by 4.58%. Largest amounts were in other articles, some of the capital items such as the Eldridge Public Library project, dredging, and the like, as well as a decrease in the school department assessments and the water department budgets and water capital. So the capital budget was also almost a 20% increase over the prior year as we had tried to preserve those funds. The educational assessments are based on the regional agreement. And so we have Monomoy Regional School District at $8,524,697. And the Cape Cod Regional Technical High School came in at just over $450,000 based on the number of Chatham students who attend the regional school district. And we'll look for the regional school district budgets to come in sometime in January when they're due per the regional agreements. We always highlight the tax rate, but that is just one component is the actual mill rate, because we had the value of Chatham increased by 10.1% in FY22 from FY 2021. So the total overall valuation of the town is just over $8.2 million, where in FY 2020 it was, actually that should be FY 22, it's $8.2 million. FY 2021, it was $7.4 million. Billion.
Billion.
Billion dollars. So again, this is the highest valuation for the town ever. So an increase of 10.1%. That equated to a decrease in the mill rate or the tax rate of 7.8%. So the tax rate went from $4.98 down to $4.62 for the current fiscal year. And we have excess levy capacity, and I pointed this out in your packet as well for the past, I think since 2011, I think I have that listed in the packet. Excess levy capacity for FY 2022 is $2.6 million. So that's money that we could have raised through taxation without asking the voters for an override. So that's available to us. It just takes a vote of town meeting to appropriate those funds for a specific purpose. We highlight that just because it is something that you could use that excess levy capacity for anything that would be recommended to town meeting, whether it's affordable, attainable housing, coastal resiliency, funding the OPEB liability, increased funding for Chatham Elementary School, but we bring this up all the time, that we do have that as an available source of funds.
But Alex, may I interrupt? It's Florence. I have a question,
Yes?
Mr. Chairman. But
Good,
that,
Florence.
yes, but that would then mean an increase in our taxes, would it not?
That is correct. So any use of the levy would increase the tax rate and therefore increase the taxpayer's tax bill.
That's what you want? Well, yeah.
So
Yes, thank you.
Some has their video on, download the desktop to see other people's video.
So we would point that out if the select board was to want to use some of that excess levy capacity. We always report what that impact would be.
Thank you.
Alex,
Yes?
how much does 1 penny on the tax rate correspond to an expenditure?
That would be the value.
We're getting some background noise, please. Mute.
That would be approximately $82,000.
Okay, so for every $82,000 we spend, it's worth a penny on the tax rate? Okay,
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so the town's fiscal position, the state of the town, as you can see, the property values remain high. We say that they're stable because that is the trend has been stable. They are increasing, but it's a stable amount. We don't see any risk to the values of the town right now. The tax rate remains low. Again, we're one of the lowest in the Commonwealth and the lowest on the Cape, but again, because of the high values. We always do look at the tax bill, what the taxpayer pays, and we're always pleased to say that we're right in the middle of the other Cape towns, so we're not the highest tax bill on the Cape. We tend to be somewhere in the middle. Our AAA bond rating was reaffirmed in April 2021 when we went out and issued general obligation bonds. Our reserves, the stabilization fund, is stable to our FY 2021 level. We have had no use of the stabilization fund in many years. Capital projects, we look at what has been completed, what's scheduled going forward. Our OPEB funding strategy, the reallocation of the land bank, has been very successful. I have a slide on that a little bit later. We review the budget and financial policies, and we budget with the guidance of those budget and financial policies. And then again, as we're here tonight for our 10th annual budget summit, we introduce our multi-year forecast, the 5-year plan going out, which you received tonight. And we also are looking at our pre- and post-pandemic planning. So when we looked at the FY 2023 budget, we did keep the pandemic in mind while crafting the budget, or looking to begin crafting the budget, I should say. So FY 2021 was budgeting in the unknown. FY 2022 was a core services budget. And for FY 2023, we're looking to have a budget that is budgeting for a resilient and sustainable future. And that means many things to many different people. And now's a good time to pause if you have any questions on the presentation so far, or anything you'd like to see.
Anyone on the board? Anyone out public? Seeing none?
Okay, moving forward. Item number 2 on the agenda is to set the stage for FY 2023 budget decisions and beyond. So we have an overview, and then we're looking for policy discussion and the directive, the budget directive. So we started looking back at FY 2010, which was a very difficult budget year due to the recession. And we're looking at that to the current fiscal year and the FY 2021 actuals. So when we budgeted FY 2022, it was forecasted a potentially difficult budget year, not knowing what was going to happen due to the pandemic. So our operating budget, including debt service, is and this does include the school budget as well, $42,081,848, or a 1.47% increase over the FY 2021 budget. So we try to hold that as close as possible to level funded. Our local receipts, economic growth revenues, actually declined a little bit from FY 20 to FY 2021. And the economic growth revenues are things such as motor vehicle excise tax, the hotel motel tax, the meals tax, boat excise tax, and building permits. So that makes up the economic growth factor. It also includes state aid, the tax levy, and other available funds. So it's still a favorable, stable trend because we have increased over FY 2018 and 2019, mostly due to the expansion of the room occupancy tax to the short-term rentals. So looking at our revenue comparison from the first quarter of FY 2021 to the first quarter of FY 2022, and that first quarter just closed. That quarter, the receipts that we receive in at the end of September, which cover, especially for the room occupancy and the short-term rental, that covers the periods of June, July, and August. So this first quarter of FY 2022 is $127,348 above where we were in the first quarter of 2021. You can see there are some categories, those are the ones listed in red, where we've had decrease, and some of that is due to timing. Some of that is due, especially for the rentals. We had received we had received a payment for the golf course early on in the year last year, so we expect that that will come in at the end of the year level funded. The board had also deferred some of the beach permits and transfer station, so that has some effect on this as well. And then probably the most important, though, is the short-term rental decreased by $283,000 over the prior year. However, the traditional lodging saw an increase of $135,000.
That's, Stephen.
Thank you, Peter. So Alex, just to be clear, we've got a line item that says rentals in the chart. That's not short-term rentals, that's the income rental from the golf course lease?
That are the leases and rentals for, say, the Coast Guard rental, Coast Guard, float rental, but the majority is the golf course
Okay,
lease.
that's helpful, thank you.
Alex, what are special assessments?
Special assessments are those, by the assessors, I believe it's the street assessments that we receive each year, and those have been declining for a number of years now. So we've actually reduced that estimate from about 30,000 down to about 18,000 for next year.
Jeff? Oh, sorry,
I have
I'm
one
sorry.
more question, sorry. Did can you indicate how much the licenses and permit fees went up last year? I mean, did we increase, we did increase some fees, but we did decrease or held over or deferred some as well? 'Cause-
I believe the total, and I do have it here.
Yeah, I believe 2 years ago, we increased some of the transfer station fees,
Right.
including recycling, but then the renewal for the stickers, we extended it out a month, so that then, I guess, ended up in the next fiscal year versus closing
Okay.
out on June 30th.
Thanks.
And that was difficult with some of the timing, deferring some of those, but we did get about 130,000 more.
Thank you.
And Jeff, you had a question.
Yeah, I did. Alex, what quarter is this now? You said June, July, August? Or is this the first quarter of our fiscal year, July, August?
It's
September?
for most of these receipts, except for the room occupancy
Okay.
and the meals tax, it's July, August, and September.
Okay.
For the room occupancy and the meals tax, because those are collected through the Department of Revenue, it's a month behind. So those are the receipts for June, July, and August.
Okay, gotcha. That's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions? Dean?
Alex, on that short-term rental, so would that have been a month behind last year as well? I mean, I'm just looking at that
Yeah, I'm
$283,000 decline, and I'm wondering if that's concerning in any way.
Well, we'll look at the trend. I mean, it is concerning if you look at just the first quarter. Now, if we go into the second quarter and it comes up a little bit, that would be good. But it also could be explained by more people had short-term rentals in FY 2021. With the pandemic, I think a lot of people came down and were renting short-term, and it had just come into being. Now, people moved down here permanently. A lot of people didn't rent out their house, I think, during the pandemic, so that might have had something to do with it as well.
Yeah,
And short-term rentals are defined as under 30 days?
Yes.
Okay, so that could be an indicator.
Yeah, we'll need to get and look at more data on that to try to understand it, because, and I think you may be right, that there were people that rented out the year before but didn't this summer and came and stayed. And we've had, 300 new residents of the town, too. But the business community had a fabulous summer, from what I gather, so.
And that's reflected here with the local meals tax. That's, for the first quarter.
Yeah.
It's $85,000 above where it was last year. So
Yeah.
although in a future slide, you'll see that it decreased over the whole fiscal year, and that was due to restaurants being closed.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, remind me, are we at 4%? I'm sorry.
Corey had a question.
Yep.
Sorry. You're-
Really a question, I'm just going to just reinforce
no,
the
well,
fact that, with the short-term rentals, in the past, we had people coming and renting for a month or the whole year, and now they're going to go back into the seasonal rental, short-term rentals. So
Right.
it's probably just a kind of a wave that's kind of shifted over, and it's going to even itself out at some point. But I think that's where some of the numbers kind of get played around with, yeah.
Hey, thanks. I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
That's fine. Are we 4% on the meals tax? Where are we?
The meals tax is 0.75%. The hotel motel tax is 4% local.
Okay. We're 0.75% on the meals tax.
Yes,
And is there a ceiling there?
that's all that we can raise.
That's
That's
it,
by
okay.
statute.
And how about on the room tax?
On the room tax, it could be anywhere from 0. The town adopted the local rooms tax, I believe, in the 1980s, and we've been at 4%. We could go up to 5% or 6%. 6% is the cap.
That's the cap, that's the ceiling. And then if we were to do paid parking, would that land in this account as a local receipt?
If we have paid parking, that would land in this account unless you were to have a special revenue or stabilization fund for parking.
Parking. Okay, good.
Hey, Alex, can you characterize, especially during the pandemic, how the short-term rental tax affected the town? If we had it or didn't have it, because we didn't allocate it to anything, or any increase. It's kind of a subjective opinion, but if we didn't have that, how would the balance sheet show? What would it show? I'll tell you where I'm going. There are towns, and we have been discussed about, let's increase that. We haven't done that yet. And I'm trying to put it in perspective. If we were to increase it, what would it really do? And I have the impression that it helped us quite a bit during the pandemic, but I may overstate that.
It did. And, in FY 2021, we received almost $2.6 million in the combined room occupancy. So short-term rentals brought in $1.3 million for FY 2021, which we did not have that previously, or it wasn't broken out in FY 2020. It did take effect on July 1st, 2019. In FY 2020, we received $1,898,000 in room occupancy tax, and as I said, last year, $2,598,000.
Okay,
So-
thank you. Stephen?
And Alex, isn't it the case that 1.3 roughly in 21 short-term rentals more than offset by slight amount, the incremental spending due to the pandemic? Wasn't that close to 900,000 or $1 million in 21?
Yeah, that, it did. I mean, and it also helped us, that's one reason why we had free cash certified at the high amount, because we had estimated low. We didn't know what the short-term rentals were going to do, how much it was going to bring in. We had nothing to forecast on, but we'll discuss that later on in what we're looking at for next year.
Thank you. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Alex, in FY 2021, we weren't allowed to budget in the short-term rentals, right? That was directed from the Revenue Department.
That's correct.
But we can do that now.
We have an estimate from last year, so we will budget that for this year, yes.
And I know Harwich just increased theirs from 4% to 6%. Do you happen to know about the other surrounding towns? I guess we're surrounded only by Harwich technically, but.
I know that I think Provincetown is at 6%, and I believe Eastham just went up to 6%. I think Orleans might have gone up to 6% as well.
Do you happen to know about Brewster?
And Brewster has gone to 6%. I think they did previously. The room occupancy tax now would be 5.7% to the Commonwealth, the local percent, either 4 or 6 to the town, the 2.75% for the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund. So it could be as much as, I think, 12%, 12.75%.
The increase, does that require the action of town meeting?
It does require an action of town meeting.
Okay, I do, and I see John Whalen in the audience, and John and I were on the Finance Subcommittee some years ago when we looked at this, and one of the arguments against it was that if you raised it, tourists would go to some of the surrounding towns where they didn't have to pay more than 4%, but now that argument is largely taken away. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Anyone else?
Okay.
Okay.
So moving forward for the current fiscal year, FY 2022, estimated levy limit was $38,597,000. Our 2.5% increase by statute was $815,000 and change, and new growth was very strong at $447,454. Again, we didn't raise that amount through the levy limit. We had excess levy capacity. Our estimated local receipts was $6,723,000, which was actually 74% of the prior year. You might recall when we had our first budget summit, we were looking at around 60% to forecast, but as we saw those receipts come in, when we had the tax recap setting, we were able to raise that to 74% to lessen the amount raised through the tax levy. And then we have estimated other available funds, such as the Land Bank Fund, the last year of debt service on property purchased with Land Bank, and then free cash of $3.6 million that was appropriated for capital and other one-time items. And again, we remind the board that we had received the $2,265,000 from Harwich for the IMA, and we will probably get another payment of $1.5 million this fiscal year per the IMA as amended.
So,
Jeff?
Alex, just quickly, the IMA would come in fiscal year '23, the 1.5,
Yes.
towards the end of the year or whatever, I think.
No, actually, this year,
Oh, this year.
FY 2022.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so I think you touched upon this a little bit, revenue policy decisions. We look at revenue diversion, the impact to the FY 2022 and forward estimated receipts, short-term rental tax, the impact of that. Again, that could lessen the amount raised through the tax levy if we keep it with the general fund. And then the fiscal impact equity, the effective fees on the entire community. That's been something that we've mentioned at previous summits, and we keep that in this presentation for you to consider. So I know we had a lot of questions there, but I'll pause again if you have anything else that you want to talk about right now before we move on to FY 2023 budget forecast and critical factors.
Okay, I don't see any from the board. Anybody in the audience? I don't see any, Alex. Stephen, sorry.
Alex, on page 6 of the package for tonight's meeting, you have a chart detailing 10-year growth rates or expenditure rates across the various government budget lines.
Mm-hmm.
The average of those over 10 years is just a tick over 25%. Several, though, are kind of significant outliers, and I'm kind of just generally curious as we sort of think about the future, about some of the numbers in the past. Natural resources has had a growth rate of just about 100%, 99.26%, which is nearly 4 times the town average. Is there a reason why their budget has essentially doubled in 10 years that we can isolate?
That was due to the consolidation and reorganization when the harbor master's budget went into natural resources from public safety.
Okay, terrific, that's helpful. Public Works went up 47%. Is there, again, some factor or two that can be isolated as to why that number's grown so significantly over the last decade? Sort of 2 times the local average?
Public Works, I believe we had, again, was the principal projects and operations administrator going over to that department as well as some other items. And we have now the grounds, parks and grounds budget is in that, where that used to be in recreation, although it's still under DPW. But again, I think the cost, the contracted services for some of our sewer operations, as well as some of the CMAS hauling and the removal of recyclables has all contributed to that.
Okay, the last one that jumps out the page, at least to me, is insurance, which has grown at 131% relative to the 25% local average. Is that because we think we're insuring more properties, or just casualty rates have gone up, or is there, again, something we can isolate to that effect?
That is that the value of the town went up, and we had a big hit for 1 year, I know that, as well as we've added cybersecurity insurance and some other items. So we always look at insurance to see if we can, go out to bid and get the best market rates.
Right.
But again, it's usually a 10% increase every year.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Stephen. Anyone else? Okay, Alex.
Okay, so again, the critical factors, we're looking at priorities, policy issues, directives, as well as the education assessments. So our budget forecasts, we have a 5-year budget forecast that I handed out this evening, and that shows the FY 2020 and FY 2021 actuals, the current year budget as voted in June, and then our FY 2023 and FY 2024 forecast. Again, this is subject to change. Our assumptions are very conservative at this early stage. We have not received the budget requests from the department heads yet, so we're looking. Some of the assumptions are, as just stated, probably a 10% increase in insurances. We'll look at the health insurance once Cape Cod Municipal Health Group has a healthy balance in their coffers. However, this year they had a budget premium holiday, so I'm not expecting that next year as those rates have been going up, but we've been able to hold that steady. Partly in due to the fact that employees now contribute more to their health insurance than the town does. Well, not more than the town, but a larger percentage than legacy employees. So they're contributing 35% as opposed to 30% for some of our longer-serving employees. So again, our assumptions remain conservative, both in our estimates and in our expenditures at this juncture. So FY 2023 factors, the educational budgets, per the regional agreement, they're due on January 15th, which is a Saturday, so we've moved that up to January 14th. So just notice, giving the school board notice right now. We keep the small annual capital items remain in the operating budgets. We've moved those out several years ago. Our debt service projections, we're looking at debt drop-off as well as how we issue new debt going forward, and we'll update the debt service projections. Our town facilities, both the maintenance of town facilities and the continued needs to have resiliency for our town facilities. I know we've mentioned it previously, we all consider this to be the new annex. It's now 10 years old, actually 12 years old. So again, we're going to need to do some work to some of these buildings, even though we consider them new buildings. We always look at our state and federal mandates, OSHA, our OPEB liability, and how that impacts the town's rating. And then COVID-19 is still in our world right now, so we have to plan for that as well. So our assumptions at this stage for FY 2023 is to increase the local estimated receipts, and we'll return to the policy of estimating 85% of our prior year actuals. And then we'll look at any items that might be diverted to a revolving fund, as we rely sometimes on the revolving funds, such as the park and recreation revolving funds, to offset the amount that we raise through local tax levy or estimated receipts. We'll rely more on those. Our expenditures, we're looking at the priorities for additional services and resiliency efforts. I think there's a question.
Yeah, Dean, go ahead.
Alex, back on the revenue for the local receipts. So last year we leveled them at 74%. We were originally going to do 67%, and then the outlook looked better. Are we comfortable bumping it back up to 85, or should we stay in the 75% range?
Looking at the receipts, and especially with the short-term rentals added, I think we could budget it at 85% of the prior year actual comfortably without much risk. However, we'll look at that as we move through the budget process. We don't set those until the actual tax recapitulation sheet, which usually is in September of next year. But again, when we present this to the voters, we present a very conservative budget, knowing that we could increase that and reduce the amount raised through the tax levy.
Okay, thank you.
And then our education, we have the Monomoy Regional School District per the regional agreement, and the Cape Cod Technical High School, again, based on foundation numbers or the number of students that attend the schools, as well as the debt service for for both the schools which are new. And then there's a question of additional support for the Chatham Elementary School that I know the board has brought up in the past and been supportive to keep that Chatham Elementary School a vibrant school within our community.
Alex, Florence, may I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Florence, thank you.
Do you have any idea, Jill or Alex, if the school committee is planning to discuss this and make a recommendation to us this year? Is it on their agenda?
Mr. Chair, we have the school superintendent with us in person, Scott Carpenter, if you want him to address that.
Yeah. Welcome, Scott.
So, yes, I would anticipate that the school district would, and the school committee would move forward a recommendation on changes to the regional agreement language that, that deal with assessment. And we would have moved it forward for fall town meetings, but I guess there's language within the regional agreement that it can only be addressed at a annual town meeting, so it's been bumped back to the spring, but we have wording that I think set a place that we could move it forward, so I would anticipate that in the upcoming months, we will revisit that wording and bring it here to you.
Scott?
Dean?
So the dollar amount that was thrown around in the press about it was in the vicinity of like $580,000 or so?
Right, so I would call it 600,000, give or take, and it's really, it's looking at how much more does it take to operate a much smaller elementary school at Chatham Elementary than Harwich Elementary, so that the per pupil costs are quite a bit higher at Chatham Elementary because it is so small. It's just an economies of scale issue. And I think the way the regional agreement is written, I don't think anyone intended that Harwich disproportionately carry that added extra cost, but that's the way it just has played out.
If that were to be approved by the two towns for FY '23, is that a static number, or would in '24, '25, would if that same approach were approved, would that dollar amount change?
So the recommendation that Michael McMillan and I have discussed with the school committee is to come up with an alternative approach to assessing, where we look at as we're going through a budgeting process, each year we annually have a budget for each elementary school, and that the budgets that we're moving forward would be put into that equation, so that you would, in any given year, it would just be the additional amount. It takes that additional per pupil cost at Chatham Elementary School and has the town covering that, essentially.
Okay.
But it's mathematically what the proposal is that if both towns just pay for their elementary schools out front, or that's how we get this by, and again, just taking the operating costs of the elementary schools, assessing those to both towns, and then splitting the cost of the middle school and high school. But it comes up to roughly 600,000, and you could say it's 600,000 in FY '22 dollars. If Chatham Elementary School continues to shrink faster than Harwich Elementary School, and they're both shrinking as the Cape student enrollment is shrinking, across all towns, you'd see the costs slightly tick up towards Chatham, and if Chatham Elementary School rebounds in number relative to Harwich, you'd see it start to slide down a little.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Scott?
Thank you. Florence, is that
Yeah.
enough? Go ahead.
Yes, I guess I'm on. Does this, in addition to changing the agreement approval by both towns at town meeting, does it also require approval by DESI?
It does. So we have been proactively vetting this with DESI. So, at least as we understand it, DESI has, sort of tentatively signed off to the concept. But again, I think the biggest approval that needs to happen is the voters in two towns.
So would this then impact if it was voted at town meeting in May or June of 2022? Will this then impact the 22-23 budget, Jill, Alex?
Mr. Chair, so
Go ahead.
when we first discussed it, it would be the approval of the regional agreement and then having to come back to town meeting. We thought maybe at a fall town meeting, but I think, and we're meeting tomorrow on this, so I'm not sure about the queuing of it, if it's regional agreement and then having to wait until the next fiscal year. So regional agreement gets approved in May, June 2022. Would it affect the 23 budget, or would it affect the FY24 budget? And so who you have here is Mr. McMillan, who's the regional school business manager.
Yeah, okay. Could you introduce yourself and then continue?
Good evening. My name is Michael McMillan. I'm the school business manager for one of my regional school district. So I was just going to pick up on that point. I'm just going to pick up on that point, which is because obviously we'll have a budget and we'll have a regional agreement and proposed changes to that regional agreement. And I've been in discussion with DESE, Department of Education, and they said we would be able to vote for a budget based on the revised regional agreement, and they would provide some wording along the lines of subject to approval of the regional agreement changes. So it does put us in you're in slightly shaky ground, because if the regional agreement doesn't get if the changes don't get approved, we have to be ready with the original budget, or rather the budget and assessment based on the original agreement. But the idea would be to try and do it all in one meeting. So it's, it's slightly, there's a nuance to it, but it is possible.
Regardless of the timing, Alex did put in a placeholder in her assumptions for $600,000 if it needed to be proposed for FY23. And again, we'll report that as we get closer and have the conversations with DESE and our financial team, which also includes the Harwich Town Administrator and the Finance Director.
Florence, is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I have Stephen and then Jeff. Stephen?
Thank you, Peter. Can either of you gentlemen give an estimate historically to the growth rate and expenditures at the elementary school? Is there a number we can put to that roughly?
At the elementary schools, I mean, roughly.
Yeah, back in the
Yeah,
envelope.
I'd like 2 to 3%, I would say. I mean, if you look at it as if it was proportionate with the overall changes in the last few years, it would be around that range.
And we can go, send you, Stephen, and the board that, that analysis, because each year, we have the overall budget, but we budget out each school has its, so you have, each school has a budget, the central office has a budget. So, so we track those ever since the districts come together.
I think, when we get into this conversation more formally, certainly that's something I think the Finance Committee would be interested in seeing that data. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Jeff and then Corey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just think it's, and Jill spoke to it already, but I just think it's prudent that we have a placeholder of $600K in the FY 2023 budget. And I think it's also prudent to think about, other sources of revenue that might, be able to fund that. So just keep that in the back of your head. But I think it's prudent now to bake that in. Thanks.
Corey? Thanks, Jeff.
Oh, I have a question on the general budget, so I'll defer to any comments on the extended budget before I get into my comment.
Okay, thank you. Scott, go ahead.
Just one other placeholder that I'd strongly recommend we also look at, and I've mentioned this before and over the past years, but we're getting closer and closer to needing the roof replaced on the middle school and high school. I had Michael, was it just yesterday?
Yes.
Be part of a MSBA, sort of pre-discussion virtual meeting, but tomorrow we can expect, and actually this evening, we can expect that there's a lot of buckets in the hallways at the middle school to catch the rainfall, and so we're getting there, and it's I think coming quickly.
Great. Corey?
Which leads into there's some observations over at the middle school. I don't know where the maintenance budget, obviously it's going to be some money down the road. I know there's an issue with the window panel in the gymnasium. There's got a tarp over it. It's had a tarp for a couple of years now. So there's clearly a problem that has been identified and probably leading to a bigger problem. But you notice like there's the window in the back that seems to be rotted or falling apart, and a lot of trim work and paint work, and the little shed out back is got moss growing all over it. So there's some probably a little lag in some of the maintenance stuff that needs to be addressed and budgeted. So if we can kind of keep that in the forecast, that'd be greatly appreciated.
If I can just comment on that. So we have been developing a capital plan that lists both those things. Because when I got here, I walked around all the buildings and I was like, what's going on with that shed over there? So those things are on the list. And it's just, with those sort of things, it's just getting to the top of the priority list because it's hard to justify when there's other items that need done. But the trim on the middle school, along with the roof, is like right close to the top of our priority list.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Thank you, Scott. Okay, Alex.
So moving forward, we're looking at our revenue projections. We touched on this a little bit. Our allowable growth, which is our statutory 2.5% increase plus new growth, we're estimating $1.1 million. Our local receipts, again, is previously mentioned, 85% of prior year actual, but again, we will continue to monitor that. And then state aid, we always consider to be level to the FY 2022 budget. We only get about $214,000 anyway, so it's not a lot of money coming into the town. This is interesting, the hotel motel tax, and you can see the impact of the short-term rentals. So, big hit to the revenues from the short-term rentals, or a big increase, I should say, not a hit, but a big increase. So again, $2.5 million in hotel motel room occupancy tax. I should probably call it room occupancy because it's short-term and long-term. And then here we have the room occupancy tax, short-term versus traditional lodging. The short-term is the gray area on the bottom, and the traditional is the brown area up on top. And you can see that in FY 2021, traditional brought in more than it did in FY 20, and the short-term really was quite, and we mentioned this earlier, but $913,000 in FY 2020 as opposed to $760,000 for FY 2021 actuals. But again, that's why we will monitor these moving forward. Meals tax declined, as we noted before, for FY 2021, again, due to the pandemic and the limited availability of restaurants, and possibly, not even the pandemic, but some of the staffing issues that those restaurants have had. I've never seen so many restaurants closed for at least 1 or 2 days a week where they never have been before. So hopefully we can see some change in that for next year. And then COVID-19 funding and reimbursement. So we had several sources of revenue to help us with our response to the pandemic. So the CARES Act, Coronavirus Relief Fund, the reconciliation period reporting is due this week. So we had $543,000 of funding for eligible expenses. We've received $100,000 for the expenses through June 30th, 2020. So MEMA, again, the reporting, and that will expire on December 30th, 2021. As noted last year, there was reduced eligibility as of 9/15/2020. However, they did increase their reimbursement rate from 75% to 100% for certain items that were eligible. And it's been pulling teeth to get money from FEMA, but again, it's a lot of reporting for everyone. The ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act, for which the town is eligible both through dedicated funds for us as well as funds through the county. And these are for items, specifically, they are looking at water, wastewater, and broadband infrastructure. So as mentioned at the special town meeting, we'd be looking for some of those articles that were passed and funded at town meeting for some ARPA funding to reduce the amount that we need to borrow. So excuse me, more to come on that. And then for the items that we will not receive reimbursement for COVID-19, the town will have to fund those items. This fiscal year, we'll look for an article at the annual town meeting with a funding source, most likely free cash, to eliminate those deficits for items not reimbursed.
Alex, you have a question? Stephen?
Thank you, Peter. Alex, what are the mechanics behind the ARPA funding? Is that apply now, hope, keep your fingers crossed? Is that projects get pre-approved, or how mechanically does that work, and will that impact the FY23 budget, do we think?
Well, we'd be looking at for the large capital items. Some of the ARPA, one of the things under ARPA was a revenue. If you had reduced revenue, you could apply for revenues. We didn't have that, obviously. You can see from our revenues that they were fairly strong, so we can't look for that because that would go for the general fund. These are very specific for projects that we'll put into. There's a lot of webinars that I've been going to, and I'll continue to research this, and we'll make our recommendations. Sarah Peak's office had asked for items that we were interested in, and we did mention water, specifically PFAS is top on the list for some of the ARPA funding, so more to come on this as we move through the budget.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Anybody else? Jeff and then Shereen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alex, on the COVID funding, we're going to hear in just a couple of days whether or not we're going to get another $440K or what?
No, the reconciliation is due, and it usually takes a few weeks for them to get back.
So this is our filing?
I think it will be extended out. We have, and I can't remember what the date was. I think it's been extended out now to December. Michael, do you know? No. I'm just trying to get it in by this Friday because that was the original date.
So, but if we were to get it all approved, and we'd get another $443K or thereabouts.
Correct.
From the CARES Act, and we'd bring that into income, if you will, or it would affect 22 or 23, or?
No, it would be used to offset the deficit. Under the FEMA reimbursement, we've expended over $843,000. So that would take care of that deficit. And then again, any items that aren't reimbursed either through FEMA or the CARES Act would have to be funded by town meeting.
Right, and the ARPA is ARPA Capital, right? That's the ARPA Capital Fund?
It's for capital,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Shereen.
So the ARPA fund would not fund like coastal resiliency, it only,
It could, and I'd have to look at what the specifics are of the ARPA funds, but again, the ones that have been mentioned and everything that I've been to has been water, wastewater, and broadband infrastructure.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
But we will look for
Anyone?
that.
Stephen?
Alex, is there a risk as we kind of think about application to ARPA or otherwise, that we begin a project that we're anticipating funding for it, only to find that there's no funding for it from ARPA or otherwise?
It's my understanding that this is really, shovel-ready type projects. So we would be very far along in the planning process.
So probably not much structural risk. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Mr. Chair, also, so when we have a larger project like that, we would appropriate the sum at town meeting to be reduced by any grant funds received, just so there isn't that risk of not having enough town funding at town meeting to complete the projects.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Okay, Alex.
Okay. So our other available funds, the biggest one this year is free cash, which was just certified at just over $8,600,000. Quite a large amount certified due to our low estimated receipts in light of the pandemic, as well as a lot of turnbacks from the departments, which I've outlined in your packet. The detail of that is in the packet. So again, free cash is used to fund capital budget, other one-time items such as land purchase, opportunity for affordable and/or attainable housing, or other capital items such as we've used it for dredging in the past, and it could be used for any projects and priorities that the board deems. PEG access funds to fund Channel 18 capital operating, the Waterways Improvement Fund, which funds the Harbor Master's capital operating budget. And we still have some funds remaining in the Land Bank Receipts Reserved for Appropriation account, and up to 3% of that amount may be used for the maintenance of land which has been purchased with land bank funds. And I know that this has been, the conservation, it's been hard to, do the maintenance on some of that land, but no, there is a dedicated funding source for that purpose. So we wanted to make you aware of that. Again, free cash can be used for any legal purpose as voted by town meeting, and it is a simple majority vote. So, this is a good opportunity for the board to look at its priorities and make a recommendation. We do like to carry over some free cash to build upon for the next fiscal year. We don't like to deplete it all the way, but just wanted to point that out.
Alex, Stephen has a question.
Alex, thank you, Peter. On page 4 of your note under expenditures, you note that the departmental turnbacks were strong due to staff vacancies. Is there a policy for when vacant positions are pulled out of the budget?
Every year, we do a review of the workload, and when a position does become vacant, we review the job description to see if it still meets the expectations and needs of the department. So we have had some vacant positions. I think the only one that had been funded in more than one budget was the DPW superintendent position, and that was just a difficulty in getting that position filled, but it is filled since March of 2020. Otherwise, we have a couple of vacant positions, one currently in recreation and COA program coordinator, but those are more recent within this fiscal year that the vacancies occurred.
Okay, but there is no standing policy of after one fiscal year, it gets kicked out?
No, there's no policy to that effect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I've always asked this question to myself, but when it comes to something like free cash, I try to equate it with my experience, but is there a number you look at generally, standard procedures that you look at? How much free cash should you have? Obviously, to me, it's something that you have to have, but is there some kind of percentage of how much you have? In industry, you get to see that. Sometimes it comes up to 5, sometimes it's 8, 10%. Is there anything in municipal budgeting that's that way?
Yeah, the financial policies state 3 to 5%. We like that as a minimum of 3 to 5% of the operating budget will be generated, free cash will be generated. The bond rating companies love the fact that you have 12 to 14% of free cash. So they think the higher the amount of free cash, the better it is. However, we don't want to put a burden on the taxpayer by lowballing our estimated local receipts. With COVID, we didn't know what was going to happen, and that was one of the reasons why free cash came in so high this past year, along with the turnbacks. There was a lot of items that, as we said, there were some vacancies, there were buildings were closed, so their expenses were trimmed, not knowing. So that was some of the reasons.
Thank you, Alex. Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alex and Jill, the turnbacks they bother me to some degree. How many vacancies do we have, and what positions are they? And should we be concerned about level of service for in these vacant positions? I've never, you know, been around a while, I've never, ever seen this before, ever. So, and $1.7 million of turnbacks, that's a big number. So are we having difficulty? I mean, I know across the state and locally and on Cape Cod, we're having tremendous difficulty hiring people and filling positions. Are we any different in Chatham, or are salaries, you know, competitive, et cetera, et cetera? So I think this is an issue, to be honest with you. I'm worried about it.
Yeah, I think this is the first time we've seen it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the total amount of turnbacks relates to the vacancies themselves. But we had, again, there were no conferences to go to. And a lot of the professional development where there were turnbacks and that was provided free virtually through a lot of the trade and municipal associations. Alex can outline exactly what it was that comprises the over $1 million of it. We've had some challenges in the vacancies that we've had with like the gate attendant at the transfer station. That's always been a difficult position to fill because the person's outdoors, you know, and it's open to the public 6 days a week, but 7 days a week for cleaning and so forth. So we haven't had that many vacancies, but we had during COVID, we had the buildings close to the public, and in particular, the community center, but we reassigned many of those employees to work in other buildings. So I think that's probably a small component, and I don't see that happening again. But Alex can outline what the other factors were. I mean, health insurance, we had health insurance savings, and that's usually a few $100,000 before us. So wages, we did do the Collins Center study back in 2018, and employees took a 0% increase in this current fiscal year, FY22. We're expecting a 3% increase, but that affects the total compensation plan. So we're reviewing that.
Okay.
It is a subject of negotiation with our bargaining units, and it's something that we do pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in seeing what positions are actually vacant and how long they've been vacant. I think we need to really think about that,
Yeah,
and how difficult they are to fill.
And we can do that. I think, as I noted in the report, you know, staff vacancies were 337,000, benefits and health insurance savings, 262,000. The final educational assessments came in less than budgeted at 125,000. Debt service savings, we had savings of 172,000, and that was due to a re-amortization through the Clean Water Trust. And then prior year encumbrances, which was money left over from the previous fiscal year, 37,000. So without those items, the turnbacks would have been 734,000, which is more on par to what we usually see each year.
Yeah, okay.
Stephen had a question.
Actually, more of a statement, I think. I think the Finance Committee expressed its support for the operating budget last year, for the entire budget last year, and the conservative nature of it that in part resulted in the kind of large, in a sense, almost overfunding of free cash. I think the taxpayers of Chatham probably don't share S&P's enthusiasm for the levels of free cash that S&P would like to see, and I would just hope that on behalf of the Finance Committee, that the Board of Selectmen, or the Select Board, excuse me, would give real thought to changing the current financial policy from 3 to 5% to minimum 3 to 5%. There's certainly a direct impact on the taxpayer there that I would hope would be thoughtfully considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Anyone else? I don't see a hand raised up. Okay, Alex.
Okay. Other available funds to fund are the revolving funds, as I mentioned before, the recreation revolving fund, so not staffs, but for program costs. Shellfish revolving, which funds propagation costs. We have the receipts reserved for appropriation accounts, the PEG Access Fund for cable-related expenses, and the Waterways Improvement Fund. There's Chapter 90 State Aid Fund, for which the Highway Department submits applications to get approval for projects. And then the Waterways User Fee, or the WOOF Revolving Fund, which has a balance of just over $1.1 million as of June 30th, 2021. And that's specifically for waterfront infrastructure. All right, moving forward to the budgetary components for the town. We look always at a balanced budget, so our revenues have to equal our expenditures. We start looking at the revenue outlook because that's what we based our available cash on. Expenditures, the general operating budget, the educational assessments, the water operating budget paid for by water rates, and the 5-year capital plan. And then we have the other capital items, which are separate articles for consideration. And just to note that in the 5-year capital plan, we will identify any and all capital projects and capital items. And then we note in there, as you might have seen in your budget book and in the warrant, whether they're funded through grants, Chapter 90, Community Preservation Act funds, or a separate article, debt issuance, or separate articles for town meeting to consider. Again, a total, try to get a total look for all capital items. So you may remember this slide from a few years ago, the workload challenges and capacity. So we have workload challenges with increased demands and higher level of services needed to address broader and more time-consuming responses to the community priorities. Communication, the public information, social media, you've noticed that has been was a select board goal and a Chatham 365 recommendation, and that is now up and running in this fiscal year. I think that began on July 1st. So we've just started that. And then public engagement regarding project planning and communication. You'll see more of that, and we'll mention that a little bit later as well. A greater reliance on technology, and we definitely saw this with COVID as we sit here in a Microsoft Teams hybrid meeting with the public. So again, improved analysis for the GIS system, database management, as well as just our meeting and our technology reliance. Regulatory compliance with OSHA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, public records request, open meeting law, the FAA, EPA, and procurement all takes a lot of time and effort by staff. And then the board and commission community complexity and staff liaison requirements. So again, tasked to maintain the communication with the boards and the committees takes away from other projects often. Again, more data and work backlogs. We have project management challenges with the amount of projects and the complexity and complications of those projects. Training needs, there's new industry standards. We always look to best practices as well as federal mandates. And then the capability to provide new and recurring training without affecting our daily operations and our daily tasks. So looking to adjust the capacity and capabilities, so from employees related to workload, and maintain a healthy and productive staff. And again, go ahead.
Yeah, Alex, if I can just add to that too. Staff and the team has been really great and really adaptive during, ever since we've been under COVID and even pre-COVID. Our IT department that I've spoken about in Channel 18 has done a really fabulous job. And so they're so fabulous that every time we're doing a community forum or a select board meeting presentation, the expectation and what we're proud to serve is provide a higher level of technology and presentation to tell our story. And that's been really important. But it does take time. And I think that what you had seen a few weeks ago when Alex presented the listing of the community preservation projects, that's really important to note because there were projects that were approved at town meeting and some of the projects were put on hold just because of other juggling priorities. And, our person that we always bring up, is Terry Wayland, who's our principal projects and operations administrator. He is a very visual presenter and does a really great job, but that does take time. And so we had worked to get someone to assist like with GIS, which is what you saw when we were doing the inventory of town projects, how cool that was to see the various layers to give the information. And we're working on that, and a project coming up is the cemetery too, working on uploading all of those records and making it more visual. It just takes time. And so we've operated very well with departments. We don't have a lot of mid-management positions. We have the directors and we have our professional staff. and it's just been challenging. So I wanted to put this out here because we are going to provide better examples in more detail between now and when the budget is presented, so that the board and ultimately FinCom, when you do make that recommendation to them, will understand some of the reasoning behind it. So we have a great team. We've done a lot. Our expectations are really high. And more importantly, we understand we're here to serve the public. So that's not something that we're running away from by any means. We just want to serve the public better and tell a better story so that the voters know what they're voting on. And it takes time and effort on that.
Thank you. Any comments from the board? Jeff?
So are you going to be asking for FTEs in critical areas, Jill?
We're thinking about that. There's, as you all know, the airport is taking a substantial amount of staff resources, even though we have an airport manager who pays us to operate the airport. So we're looking at if there's another professional administrative person for DPW that could possibly handle some of those airport-related duties, higher administrative, analytical work, but also, with the cemetery too, it's not just the mowing of it, it's, the selling of the plots and really having a great database so that people don't actually have to call the offices. And so we're thinking some, again, nothing right now to make a pitch, but some higher level administrative position or possibly entry-level management positions, where we saw some of our interns who have left us after doing a great job with the Mass Maritime Academy finding jobs elsewhere. So about 50% of our workforce has longevity between 10 and actually 35 years of service. And so we're looking at that too for succession planning and making sure that we're providing up-to-date information for the public in a way that's easy to understand.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up. As you mentioned the cemetery, the commissioners have approached me, and they would like to get maybe a half-time administrative assistant to help them out with the record keeping that has been a little askew over the years. And they'd love to bring that contract in-house, and that contract that we have out for mowing services, they'd like to bring that in-house with a couple of FTEs that Tom can direct, and we'll get more granular and have more direct supervision. So I know that's going to be coming. I'm bringing it up, and I put that on the table tonight.
Yeah, thank you. That's
you, Jeff.
definitely in the area. The one position that's been really difficult to fill has been that part-time cemetery administrator position. So that's something that we're reviewing and
Just before you say anything, Joanne, I see you. Well, you're next. Go ahead, Jeff.
Me?
Yeah, you're.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, and the administrative position wouldn't necessarily be full-time, I don't think, in the cemetery, but it would be shared DPW or wherever you need that, the resources.
That's what we try to do, as many shared positions or floats, but the same category of employee that we could move around and do special projects. That's really what it
Right.
is.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Joanne? You're on mute, I believe. Looks like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a good point in the budget for us to stop, all of us, the Finance Committee, the Selectmen, and remember that what we're talking about now when we talk about the employees and our workforce is that when and we who represent also the taxpayers, this is where the taxpayer meets where their tax dollars go, with the people that serve them in the town. And I think it's very important for us to remember how important it is for us to think of the taxpayer when we're thinking of our workforce, and make sure we do remember that it is the taxpayers who provides what is necessary to provide our good workforce. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joanne. Anyone else? I don't see any other hands raised. Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. Yes, speaking of employees and the number of employees, I think you've seen this chart before. You can see from 2020 to 2021, we've gone up by 2 FTEs to 134.5 FTEs, and that was the addition of the 2 new firefighters in the FY 2022 budget. We are still well below where we were at the high point back in 2009, when we had reduced the number of employees due to the recession and with the early retirement in FY, I think it was 2012 was when it hit. So We're still below where we were, but you can see sort of a steady increase in the number of FTEs as we've tried to expand and serve the public. Again, I think we touched on this early, the educational systems, the directive to the Monomoy Regional School District and Cape Cod Regional Technical High School, multi-year financial enrollment forecasts, the capital needs, which we touched on a little bit earlier, and their debt service per the schedules that have been for debt service already financed. And our first FY 2023 budget meeting will be tomorrow for the finance team, as we mentioned earlier. We do meet on a regular basis through the year, but this will be the first time that we'll be looking at the FY 2023 budget. So that was the operating budget, and we'll move now to the capital improvements program and the capital budget, unless there's any questions.
I don't see any.
Okay, capital improvements, again, capital budget and the capital improvement program 5-year plan. We'll look at the projects, the priorities of the select board, and then any grants that may be available to fund some of these capital improvements. So we do have a project review criteria, as we've discussed and presented before from the Collins Center, which we look to preserve or enhance town assets, increase efficiency and effectiveness of government. We look for fiscal sustainability, which generate revenues and as well as grants, the impact or savings on the operating budget, the impact on the utilization by the public for certain capital projects, and then influence on policy areas, or what we call the Chatham factor, the aesthetics, historic preservation, cultural and recreational opportunities, economic growth, environmental sustainability, and public health and safety. So for FY 2022, the current year budget, there were requests of $25,930,025. Some of those were pulled out as standalone, or some of those were programmed through different sources. So the capital budget, the one-year capital budget, was funded at $2.8 million, again, through available funds, the majority being free cash. So looking at the 5-year capital plan that was presented last year, which was FY 2022 through FY 2026, we had the $25.9 million requested, 2.8 approved. What's programmed in right now for FY 2023 is $14,026,750. These were items that were identified for FY 2023 last year, or if they weren't funded in FY 2022, are carryovers, and we've programmed in for FY 2023. And we're still waiting to get the capital requests from the department heads, so we will program those in and then have a total capital plan and make evaluations and recommendations moving forward. Again, this will be everything, CPC articles, borrowing articles, anything and everything that we'll identify moving out to FY 2027, which have yet to be submitted. So we expect those outline the years in FY 25, 26, and 27 will definitely increase as the department heads submit their budgets, their capital requests.
We have a question from Stephen.
Thank you, Peter. Either for Alex or for Scott, these, as we sort of think about the capital plan, and the notice that was provided earlier that the middle school needs a new roof, is that something that the town of Chatham wears solely? Is that a district expenditure?
So based on the recommended changes with the regional agreement, it would be the town that owns the building would be addressing the maintenance needs of the roof. So for the elementary schools and the middle school being a shared facility would be a shared cost.
And is the expectation such that the roof is in bad enough condition that would happen before or after the renegotiated school agreement? Do we have any sense of that?
I don't anticipate, the way the MSBA, sort of repair project funding works is that's out there in the upcoming fiscal years, but it's getting, I think we had, probably 5 years ago, I was saying that we had about 5 years left in the roof, and, we've been patching things together, but it's starting to get to the point where.
Well, it sounds that's the case if there are buckets in the hallway.
Yeah,
That's
thank
helpful.
you.
Thank you.
Jeff, and then.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that, so the capital improvements at the middle school will be borne by the region or the town?
So I believe that it's
I think it's the region.
the regional, so at middle school and high school, there are regional costs, and at the elementary schools, it's clearly
Yeah, no,
laid out.
I think it's borne by the region. I mean, at the high school, certainly the new Monomoy High School and the middle school is borne by the region. And if we were to assume, control or total control of the elementary school, we'd fix the elementary school roof. But this is the middle school roof we're talking about. It's a shared middle
Right,
school, so
correct.
the region would pick that up based on the allocation of costs.
And I presume that in the upcoming weeks, we'll come back and share with you the regional agreement again, and knock on wood, this time we'll actually get it all the way to town meeting without a pandemic or anything else. And I think we want to go over both the assessment calculation, but also, conversations that we've, I think, now had for many fiscal years over, how to handle the capital issues.
Okay.
Okay, I have a couple people with questions.
hear that.
First is Shireen, I see Florence, I see Jacqueline, you turned your camera on, I don't know if you want to speak or not, but if you do, just raise your hand, and,
Mine's just a comment that Stephen just reiterated. There's buckets in the hallway. That sounds like a more immediate issue to address than further down the road. I don't know how you're mitigating the repairs, and water damage is, mold, mildew, all those things can be cumulative to the building's, health and wellness. So I would imagine that this is more immediate.
We have a roofing contractor that does come in and to repair flashing, so where we're seeing some seepage, particularly in the sort of science hallway areas where there's a rooftop unit going up, clearly there, in the last heavy rain that we needed to bring in the roofing contractor to shore up the flashing along the membrane seam.
okay, I have Florence, and then, I don't know if Jacqueline wants to, but then Corey. Okay?
I want to go add on to what Jeff just said. Scott, where you're planning, my understanding was that you were planning to bring to town meeting a change in the agreement relative to the elementary schools, that each town would be responsible for their own elementary school. I didn't hear you say anything to change that we were going to do this for the middle school. And if the middle school and the high school are part of the region, and therefore, like Jeff, I am assuming that it is the region's responsibility for maintenance. We're not changing the agreement for the middle school, or did I hear you wrong?
No, you're correct.
Okay, I just want to be sure that it's the elementary school, the responsibility to repair that roof is still the region, and I agree, if it's leaking, it needs to be repaired, so thank you.
Okay, Jacqueline, did you want to speak, or, I just saw you put your camera on. You're on mute. No. I tell you what, Jacqueline, I'm going to go to Corey, and then It looks like you're still on mute, but let me go over to Corey and then come back to you.
No, I just want to reinforce the issues I have with the middle school maintenance components are far beyond the roof. I mean, the gymnasium panel window has had a tarp on it for several years now. There's trim work that is moss on it, which means it hasn't been sanded or painted for years. There's that big bay window in the back that had probably some work done to it a little bit, but it must have some water damage come into it because it was, the trim and the casings were kind of pulled off for a while. But I mean, there's stuff that's not just brand new. There's significant maintenance that's probably lagging a little bit for one reason or another. So I would hope it would stay within the regional agreement and from an equity perspective, because I mean, this is stuff that should have probably been done several years ago, and it's probably getting worse as we speak. So I just want to make sure we you know, keep things in light of what really does need to be done to that building.
Thank you, Corey. Jacqueline? I can't, yeah, we can't hear you. Now, let me move on. And you can, I'll come back to you if you raise your hand if you have an issue. Okay, Alex?
We also draw to the board's attention. Thank you. We also draw attention to the board's attention to the waterfront bond that was approved back in 2017. Some of these projects have been completed, some are underway. There is a listing in your packet of the amount expended under each of these, and the fact that we will receive a lot of grants. Well, we received some grants for some of these items. So Fish Pier, South Jog Floats, the Coast Guard Float, the Trap Dock, 90 Bridge Street, Riders Cove, Old Mill Boatyard, Little Mill Pond Pier, Barn Hill Ramp Walkway, and Crow's Pond Ramp. Again, grants have been received for some of these, so we will, again, apply for any and all grant funding to offset the amount that we have to borrow and supplement this funding source for the waterfront infrastructure.
Stephen? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Peter. Just very quickly, Alex, I'm enthralled by your exhibit to the presentation that lists all the capital projects, appropriated amounts, bonded, paid down, authorized. I think it's a terrific roster and would love to see that on a current, kind of a recurring basis. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Go ahead, Alex.
Okay, and then other articles pending review. You know, as we know, the Council on Aging articles were not approved, so on November 9th, 2021 at 6:30, there is a community forum to review the Council on Aging facility next steps. So that is something that will be pending review. Community preservation projects, those are due by mid-January, so we'll see if, you know, what comes in, as well as when the town staff submits their requests, we'll look to see what projects are eligible for Community Preservation Act funding. Affordable and attainable housing. Again, we had some success at the annual town meeting and some not success at the annual town meeting, but this is a priority of the board as well as the Finance Committee and the Summer Residents and Chatham 365. So I'm sure this is a high priority, and we will see what articles will come up for affordable and attainable housing. And then the town projects, the Eldridge Garage property, beach nourishment, and dredging. We always seem to be dredging one area or another, so that's another item that I'm sure will be coming up for the other articles. I note here the water capital, because the special town meeting just approved $5.9 million to expand the wells and to mitigate PFAS at wells 5 and 8, as well as design and engineering. But again, that will be another water capital project sometime in the future for a future town meeting to approve. OPEB funding, again, this is a liability of the town, so we always bring this up. The balance in the OPEB trust fund as of June 30th was $2.4 million. The reallocation of that land bank surtax In FY 2021, we collected $546,426. The commitment for FY 2022 is just over $560,000. So that is a nice way to have a steady source of income or a steady source of revenue for the trust fund. But again, as you will recall, it does expire after 10 years. So we will look to see how we can fund that. Our annual required contribution is just under $1.6 million. We do budget around $700,000 in the benefits as a pay-as-you-go basis. And we're awaiting our new evaluation for our liability. The last one we had was 2019. We will have one coming in for June 30th, 2020. We expect that sometime before the beginning of the year. So again, the trustees will need to meet soon as part of the budget process and make any recommendations for town meeting. Again, we always fund the $150,000 through the overlay surplus, but we'd like to see if there's anything more that we can do. And other liability of the town is our debt service. So if there are no questions, I'll just move right on to debt service.
Could I ask a question, Mr. Chairman, before you go to debt service?
Yeah, go ahead, Florence, and then I have Jeff.
Going back to the community preservation funds, we are required to allocate 10% for open space, 10% for, what do I want to say, affordable housing, and 10% for historic preservation out of CPA funds. We could, if we wished, and I don't know whether this has to start with the select board, allocate our 10% to community preservation, historic preservation, sorry, and 10% to open space. And the other 80% this year, for 1 year, could be allocated to affordable housing and those funds placed in the Affordable Housing Trust instead of spending the money on a lot of assorted projects. So I would like the board, select board, or the town, you, Alex, or Jill, to look into who has to start that process if that's what you wanted to do. But I see that as an excellent source of funding. Other towns have done that for 1 year, or some towns have even done it for more than 1 year. But I think it would put a healthy amount of money into the trust and enable us to quickly buy a house if it came up on the market or whatever, or land. And it certainly would be a step toward supporting affordable housing. So I really would like to see how that could be handled, whether it has to come from the select board or I would imagine, but anyway, my thought, 80% to affordable housing.
Thank you, Florence. Let me go with Dean first. Go with Dean first, and then Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Florence. And she's mentioned this a few times, and I think it's and we could do this for more than just 1 year. We essentially did it this past year when we requested $800,000 and the committee, Community Preservation Committee recommended $1 million. And I suspect, I don't know whether the committee has organized yet. Alex, have they met yet this year?
They have not met yet. They have a meeting posted. Well, they have reserved the room at the community center for November 1st, but we were looking to schedule a Microsoft Teams meeting, which we'll probably do tomorrow.
Okay.
So we can meet virtually.
Okay. Well, I would suggest, Mr. Chair, that at some point you might want to put on the select board agenda consideration of a request from the select board to the CPC committee along the lines that Florence has just outlined. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Jeff?
Yeah, I endorse that concept as well, especially given our position as a select board and as a town, frankly. The Finance Committee has been very supportive as well, as has the town, to some measure, in supporting affordable and attainable housing. So, and I think now's the time, or last year was the time, or the last 10 years was the time, but now's the time. So I would endorse that concept, and again, I reiterate what Selectman DeCastro just stated, and we should get it on our agenda And I don't know how we want to handle other requests for budget-related items to get on our agenda, whether we want to do them in another budget session, or whether I should bring them up now. I mean, I have other suggestions, or I'd like to take another really hard look at the room tax, room use tax, if you will, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know how you want to handle that, Mr. Chairman, and we did not discuss it
Yeah.
prior to the meeting, but and there'll be other notions as well, especially with capital, et cetera. Capital projects, I should say.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and I agree. Stephen?
Thank you, Peter. We had a meeting of the Finance Committee on Friday, just in advance of this, to try to see if there was a consensus or some consensus on various prospective undertakings. And I think the Finance Committee broadly, one of our priorities, the top two priorities was housing. And I think the Finance Committee would be broadly supportive of an effort to use CFA funding for that, as Florence has suggested. I think our sense, to be quite honest, is there's been a fair number of cats and dogs running around in that budget in the last couple of years. And that if we could really focus that on helping to create affordable and attainable housing in this town, it'd be a real victory for our efforts.
Thank you. I would agree. And Alex said this, we had some winners and we had some losers at the annual town meeting. But if you take a look strategically at what we did at town meeting, whether or not everything we did is going to get passed by the legislature is another question. But we did take an aggressive look at affordable housing, and it is among our top it's number 1 or 2, and then we have our water, which we said was going to be number 1. We have a number of other priorities, but affordable housing is top. And if you look at, again, what we did, we were able to purchase one piece of property. We were able to turn over one of our municipal small lots into, for affordable housing. What we found from that, too, when you're looking for grants, the small properties don't get you grants, and that's you have to realize that. So, and we're in a time where here in Chatham we don't have a lot of buildable land, as we said before, and so we're going to have to purchase stuff, and we need cash up front to do that, and we've seen how hard that can be. So I think it's clear that there has to be a clear understanding in the town. I think the boards understand that. Of what affordable and attainable housing is. And it's the new attainable is the old affordable, to be perfectly honest. It just stretches it out. And, you can go through the numbers, you can look at what's available, but just look at the result. We have our school population going down. We have the number of people in our, I know I'm going too far, but I'm going to say it anyway. We have our demographic is out of line. So I think it's clear that we really need to do that, and we need to get an understanding of how we can get some more property. And it's not what we're looking at is housing that you can build, that someone with anywhere from a very low income to, 6 figures needs help. So basically, I just want to reiterate, I think it's a good idea. We should move ahead with the CPA funds if we can. Any other comments? I guess I'm off my soapbox now, but go ahead.
Mr. Chair, and just to stay on your soapbox, I've talked to our Director of Community Development and thinking about calling an Affordable Housing Trust meeting with the trustees, like a work session, so we can talk about an inventory of what we've accomplished and what's next to do, including some of the priorities that we have, and we have some grant funding and for our consultants. So I just want to throw that out there so that we don't lose it with this, but we definitely want to have a focus meeting on affordable and attainable housing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? I don't see any hands up. Okay, Alex.
Okay, moving on. Debt service is, again, a liability of the town, so we look at our debt service as we plan the budget. And one of the financial indicators, and you can see here that the debt service as a percentage of general fund expenditures has been decreasing, so that's good. That's a favorable trend. And this next slide is from last year. This has not been updated, so it still includes a proposed Council on Aging and future transfer station. We will update this for the budget book presentation, but you can see that there were a lot of projects out there, again, not all approved, but where the debt is right now and how it declines moving forward. So this will be updated prior to the budget being presented in January. And now on to the last portion, really, which are recommendations and review. And I think Dean has a question.
Just a question on the debt, well, a point on the debt service. Could you just reiterate for the benefit of everyone who's listening, what is the debt capacity? Because I know this has been a concern of many people, and at the Finance Committee in particular. And I'm not saying we should borrow to the full capacity by any stretch. We're not even close. But if you could just recite what those numbers are.
Yeah. Our debt capacity is based on a formula by the state, so it's based on our FY 2020 equalized valuation. And so you take the equalized valuation, 5% of that is our debt limit, and right now we have an debt availability of $242,645,130. So we have plenty of capacity to issue debt. As a financial person, I would say we should not issue $245 million in debt.
Very good.
But, it is a tool to issue debt, to not impact the taxpayer and to finance some of these larger projects over a period of 20 years. My recommendation is never to go over 20 years because I think then you pay too much in interest costs. But while interest rates are low, and we can take advantage of some of the outside grants and, say, the ARPA funding, as well as the Clean Water Trust. We have the Cape Cod Islands Water Protection Fund, which will pay for some of our existing debt, as well as supplement some of our Clean Water Trust issuances. So the town's in a good position moving forward to issue debt when necessary.
But currently, the amount of debt outstanding is what, about 30 million?
No, we have about $89 million outstanding, and that runs through FY 2049.
Okay, sorry. And will the denominator change when we do our next valuation?
Yes.
2023, that may be?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, a portion of that overall debt to 2049 is the wastewater infrastructure.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's the majority of the debt that
majority
we
of
have
it,
outstanding.
Which was a big commitment for the town to do. Thank you.
Stephen had one, and then I have a point.
As one whose background is in finance, I fully appreciate the benefits of using debt in your capital structure. At the risk of being Johnny Raincloud, though, I will point out that Chatham taxpayers have the second highest per capita amount of debt of any community in the state, after Provincetown. So just the other side of the coin to some degree.
Yeah, and I'll just comment that two things. We have that, and this is a question too. Our debt is higher, but we've been in the water sewer business for quite a while. So a lot of that debt is something that we have that they're going to have to handle. Now, what's your total number? What debt we can hold is something we have to decide on. But I have two things. Water Protection Fund, is that included in the chart you just showed that's up there now?
No, that's a source of funding for this. We haven't received that yet. We've been notified that we will receive funds over the next 20 years for existing debt, but we don't have the schedules coming in, so I can't apply that to our outstanding debt. But it is an available source of funds that will reduce the amount that needs to be financed by the taxpayer.
And it was like in 3 different categories. I added them all together, the old ones, the middle, and the long term, and that came to somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big number. So that, okay, and the, let's see, what was the other question I was going to have? I guess that'll do for now. Thanks, Alex.
Okay, so back to recommendations and review. We had recommendations from the Finance Committee, which previously had identified, the growth of the town workforce and the institutional stress and staffing capacity versus the impact on the benefit cost, level of capital spending, and some of the prioritization. And then, as the chair just mentioned, affordable and attainable housing is probably the highest priority of the Finance Committee this year. We heard that loud and clear on Friday, that affordable and attainable housing, so they're in line with the board on that as well. The Summer Residence Advisory Committee position paper for 2021, capital projects prioritization, and they also had a paper on the residential exemption. They were opposed to it, and in part, one of their reasons why they said they were opposed was that they didn't think that it would generate affordable and attainable housing. They thought there were better ways to achieve that in the town. Just a note of interest on that one. And then when we look at the budget and planning out our financial plan, we feel it's very important to sustain the S&P AAA bond rating, as that allows us to borrow at lower interest costs. So, again, an increase in fund balances, the stabilization, I don't think we need to increase free cash right now. Has a very healthy balance. Our pension and OPEB, the liability, so the burden and the plan is what S&P is looking for. They look for budgetary flexibility, which with free cash, we have that budgetary flexibility as the board sets its priorities and directives. It can be used for affordable, attainable housing. It can be used for any purpose as voted at town meetings. So that's a nice thing to have this year. The financial and budget, fiscal and budget management policies, the annual review that we look at as part of the budget summit and budget planning. And speaking of that, again, the financial policies update, annual review of the free cash, minimum of 3 to 5% in order to build and maintain our reserves. Last year we did, in previous years, we updated the capital improvements budget to be 9% of the operating budget, as well as a previous year updating the purchase order requirement for expenses over $5,000 up from $2,500. So for the FY 2023 budget, review of the process, looking at the directives, and then the budget calendar. So this is sort of wrapping up what we've discussed tonight. So again, the impact of COVID may continue, so we need to be prepared. Level services to FY 2022 might not mean a level budget because the cost of supplies are likely to increase, which would equate to an increase in the budgets. Again, we always look to trim expenditures wherever possible, and we need to focus on the initiatives that streamline the processes and make us more efficient. And then strategic budgeting, we've had this the last several years due to the pandemic. Identify ways to support residents and businesses to soften the impact and promote a faster recovery and add or redirect resources to assist in that process. Yes.
Are there any county programs that do bulk supply buying that can offset any of the impending costs that we're going to see rise?
Yeah, the town does. We do bulk purchasing through the departments, and we try to get that. And there's also through the county purchasing and the operations, OSD, the combis through Massachusetts, where we have state contracts and they have big contracts, so we get those. We can grab onto those and get better pricing. Okay, so looking forward, our priorities, policy issues, directives, social infrastructure, economic and community sustainability, our OPEB liability, community initiatives, housing initiatives, coastal resiliency and climate change, as well as COVID funding for the future. And we want to bring up the Select Board's town value statements that were presented earlier. And these are what the Select Board feels is important and a value of the town to protect and enhance the financial health, the educational excellence offered by the town, future use of town land, buildings, and facilities, protect and enhance professionalism and effectiveness of the town staff, board, and committees, protect the environmental and historic quality of the town, support demographic diversity, unique needs of the younger and senior populations, enhance relationships and communications, emphasize long-term strategic planning, and enhance effectiveness and efficiency. And wrapping up with our FY 2023 budget calendar, tonight begins the budget season, and here's the calendar bringing us up to the May 9th, 2022 annual town meeting, where all the budget items for FY 2023 will be acted upon.
Stephen, sorry.
Alex, thank you. Can we just hop back 2 slides to the priorities? I think one thing that's a sort of looming concern, not necessarily for FY '23, but perhaps '24 and beyond, to the Finance Committee, is PFAS. And interestingly, water's not on that list that I can see. Some of us, I think, I'm sure some of the board members attended the online PFAS conference that the MMA had in the last month or two. And they had several town managers speaking to the issues and solutions that they deployed to try to look after this issue. And the cost of some of these treatment facilities are $10 to $12, $15 to $20 million per community, per facility. And knowing that we need at least one of these things, and I'm wondering whether or not we're going to ever need more than that, I think we need to keep that prospect in our minds as we do our budgeting and keeping some powder dry relative to a prospectively enormous funding cost that may not be currently anticipated. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
I agree with Stephen. I think this is one of the biggest things we're going to have to face in the next couple of years, and it's important to keep that in mind. Again, I believe that we do have our priorities that we'll be discussing in November as a select board, and I'm pretty sure that that's going to be on the top of the list for all of us.
Dean and then Jeff.
Yeah, we did add, when we revised our priorities, I think it was, what, in January? When did we do it? We added water in. And maybe that should, as
We amended them right after the first.
yeah, as Stephen suggested, that probably should be added to that slide. Thank you.
All right, Jeff.
Yeah, just ditto. Thanks.
Definitely.
Okay. Any other comments from the board? I don't see anything online with anybody raising their hand. The only comment I'll have is just to take that one step further, to look at, our debt over, which we normally do, but to look at our entire debt and what it really means to us over the next 5 to 6 years with a number of the priorities, especially capital budgets, because that'll tell us a lot. And then it's a decision of how much do we want to do. I mean, there's good news with a high evaluation. Our tax rate goes down, except it goes down 17%, which is a smaller percentage, and then 7%, no, 17%, and then our valuation went up, 20%, or 10 to 15%. So it's still an impact to the taxpayer, and we have to look at the bottom line of that as we continue on. Okay, I see Joanne, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank Jill and Alex for an outstanding presentation, and also thank them for the reduced tax rate for fiscal year '22. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a wonderful get-together, and I think it's the best we've had.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Any other comments? I would echo that. Nice job from the staff. And, it's a tough job to begin with, and we're going to have a tough time over the next few months anyway. So anyway, anything else? If not, Jill, anything before we ask for a motion to adjourn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So moving forward from tonight through basically January, we're going to have conversations, and I know that many of the board members want to talk about revenue and so forth. So we'll schedule that for upcoming meetings, and then we have a meeting tentatively scheduled, or an item tentatively scheduled for November 16th for the select board to review your value statements and the goals and objectives. And with returning board members here, we don't have to start from scratch, but certainly I want you to think about why you chose to run for office. What are some of your items that you want to get done? What are your legacy efforts in addition to your representation? the community. So that will be coming up on the 16th. And feel free to email myself or Alex if there's any follow-up or any suggestions from anyone, the public, the Select Board, FinCom, our financial team here with the regional school district. We're happy to hear from everybody, and everything will be considered. So I just want to thank everybody for your time and attention, especially on this stormy night. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Jill.
Comment?
Thank you, Jill and Alex, thank you.
All right. Good
job.
A motion to adjourn. We have a second?
Second.
Second, okay, let me start with Shereen.
Aye.
Corey?
Aye.
Dean?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Chair says aye. Good evening, Chatham, and thank you. Thank you, Finance Committee. Thank you, Scott, and thank you from the School Committee. Bye now.